Once the indexing task has been completed, the image and the metadata for the document image can now be released to the management platform, or what we call the management application. In some cases, there's also an option to release to a folder. In other words, you put the image and the metadata surrounding the image into a folder, or it can be released into a specific line of business application, or as most common, it will be released to an ECM platform. You can also determine the type of file to be released, whether the image is going to be a TIFF file or a PDF or some other obscure format. There is also, in most cases, an option to put the extracted information into the same file as the image. The most common way to do that is to make it what's called a searchable PDF, so that actually the picture of the document and the text that was extracted from it are wrapped up into the same file. Most document management or ECM solutions have their own back-end architecture. So whether that's Highland or Documentum or Oracle Stellent or FileNet or any particular platform, they have their own back-end architecture. So the release function is usually specifically geared towards that individual vendor. In other words, every vendor has their own release requirements. Sometimes, depending on the vendor, the release function is integrated or customized by an integrator to perform even more highly specialized functions like releasing directly to a workflow process or some other special requirements. While each platform has its own release criteria, in terms of core data management capability, all ECM platforms work in pretty much the same way. The index and metadata, or metadata, is kept in a database. Usually that is Microsoft SQL Server. And the image or files, the picture of the document itself, is kept separately from the index database. This is a way to maintain a high level of search performance. The index record in the SQL database points to the relevant object, the document image, via some kind of linking scheme, and that entire architecture is managed by an image management service, for lack of a better word. Each vendor calls that something else, but it's a service inside the ECM platform itself. Whatever the vendor may call it, that kind of service exists inside each and every ECM platform. So the evolution of this concept that David Black came up with, and the software that was started by Imagery and then many others, has led to a very traditional view of what capture is, and this is, of course, relevant to the whole SharePoint discussion. The prevailing opinion is that you capture first, for all the reasons we just discussed, that underpowered hardware problem, that the network issue that forced capture to be a step that is performed before an image is released to the management platform. The traditional view holds that capture is a staged production process, that capture in the traditional sense also does not lend itself very well because it was primarily designed to be a centralized activity, that it lends itself very well to being distributed both architecturally and perception-wise. The capture requires direct support for each ECM backend or ERP solution or wherever it's releasing to. And most importantly, that all scanning activity must require some kind of capture software. Hold that thought. Let's switch gears for a moment and take a look at SharePoint 2010. What's unique about SharePoint, or what's different about SharePoint 2010? SharePoint 2010 is a different kind of content architecture than most ECM platforms. In many ways, it's far more modern and far more flexible. It is designed for the rapid distribution of content across servers, multiple SharePoint servers, and content management and sharing is principally designed to meet the needs of an entirely web-based architecture. SharePoint 2010 out of the box has several unique attributes. For starters, each file or object inside SharePoint is assigned a content type. There can be many different kinds of content types. Each content type can have up to 6 tags that identify the particular file. SharePoint can handle multiple content types, each with its own unique set of tags for its own unique type of content. So you could have a content type called purchase orders, another content type called invoices, and each would have their own unique set of individual tags, which the SharePoint infrastructure uses to execute retrievals or to categorize and classify the content type. All items saved into SharePoint have to have a content type, whether that's a default type that is set up or one that is specifically customized for a particular set of users or a particular type of application. This, of course, coupled with a number of other things inside the SharePoint architecture, like the content manager, the data, metadata architecture, all of this together raises some very fundamental questions like, does capture still have to come first? Is capture something that comes first, or is it now an ad hoc management application in SharePoint 2010? In other words, can you do it after the fact? Do I need capture software at all, or can I just simply scan? These are all very good questions, and let's take a look at what happens inside SharePoint due to the fact that SharePoint really has its own unique content management architecture. Well, first of all, scanners aren't underpowered anymore, and neither are computers or networks. Those technical changes, along with the prevalence of SharePoint, raises some really interesting questions about what is necessary to get paper documents into SharePoint. While production scanning into SharePoint is a different issue, which we'll look at another time, SharePoint is ideally suited for distributed scanning. This, of course, coupled with the fact that SharePoint is an enterprise architecture, may also mitigate the need for performing production scanning by simply allowing scanning to happen at the source of the paper, or let's say individual users that just want to have a paper-to-digital bridge. We think that given the architecture of SharePoint and the increased intelligence and capability of scanners, in essence reverses step 3 and 4 of the traditional capture process model. Since a SharePoint administrator can define the content types, the organizer feature, which is the thing that groups the different content types together, taxonomies, SharePoint has the ability to let people tag an item, apart from the content type tagging, tag an item and classify it as a taxonomy, which is provided by the SharePoint administrator, or a folksonomy, which is provided by an individual user. Of course, the metadata management, so if you did extract information from the image as you scanned, that metadata could be handed off to the metadata manager and be tagged as being appropriate for a certain class of SharePoint user. In that event, every image that is saved will have default values, because remember, it has to have a content type. The additional indexing, classification, zonal OCR, etc. can now be performed after the fact. So to put it in a nutshell, SharePoint comes with a pre-indexing architecture. So just by setting it up to have content types for the different types of documents that people are likely to put into SharePoint, and given the fact that scanners are far more intelligent today than they were in the past, you can simply just scan to SharePoint.